So let me say a little bit about what that discipline of media ecology that Brian mentioned earlier is. The French call it McLuhanism. That's the French word for media ecology, because they think of Marshall McLuhan in Toronto in the 1960s and his constant discussion about how the introduction of electronic and image-based technologies have altered our cultural sensibilities profoundly. And we need to take stock of the almost total way they've changed us. One of his books, you recall, was entitled The Gutenberg Galaxy. As though to live in a culture that had the printing press and did not have the electronic or image-based technologies was to live on another solar system. The Gutenberg Galaxy, he called it, because we live in the post-Gutenberg galaxy. What media ecologists since Socrates have studied is what happens to a culture when the dominant media within it shift. Those of you who are students of Socrates recall the Phaedrus dialogue, where the discussion there is whether the Greeks shall take up writing. Writing was over 1,000 years old by this point. And other cultures were writing. The Greeks were still at the time an oral culture. You know, the Homeric material was originally oral, and only later the person that we call Homer wrote it down. But this existed as oral poetry for many, many years. You can read Milman Parry's discussions of that, if you wish, in the 1950s. But Socrates objected to writing. He thought it would cause memory to atrophy, and it did. And he thought that it would lead to misunderstanding, because if you have a question from someone like me, you can ask it in the Q&A, and at least 1 out of 3 times I can fumble out an answer. But if you raise a question, he says, to something that's written, it just tells you what it said the last time, right? If you say, but what does a square plus b square equals c square mean? It still says a square plus b square equals c square. It doesn't change anything. And so Socrates actually thought it would be a net loss if an oral culture became a writing culture. I happen to respectfully disagree with him. But he was right that some things were lost. I also, by the way, for those of you who love irony, and I love irony, the older I get, the more I like irony, I also note the irony that the only reason that you and I know that Socrates objected to writing is that his student Plato disagreed with him and wrote the Phaedrus dialogue down for us. So there we have it. That's our irony for the evening.